Founded by Amir Nathoo in 2015, Outschool.com offers live video-enabled online classes for young people ages 3 to 18. Learners can select content ranging from typical academic subjects and tutoring services to more adventurous classes like pet trick training, forensic science, engineering with Minecraft, and wilderness survival skills. Instructors create their own courses based on their own interests and expertise and set their own prices. And many teachers choose Outschool.com to share their knowledge and passions within a creative and flexible learning environment. I know my kids have loved their Outschool.com classes over the years. So I first met Amir back in 2019 and interviewed him for an article I wrote at Forbes.com. And I'm so honored to speak with Amir again today as he shares his founder story and tells us more about Outschool.com's past, present, and future. Amir Nathoo, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be talking to you again. Really great to be here.
It's great to have you here, and just so exciting to see Outschool.com's growth and impact, even in just the past 5 years since we first spoke. I want to get to all of that, but I'd love to start, if we could, Amir, with a little bit of your background. You were trained as an engineer, but I know that when we first spoke, you talked about how it was your childhood experiences that really were the inspiration for you ultimately creating Outschool.com. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was reflecting on my own experiences with learning that was a heavily influence to the founding of Outschool. Both my parents were teachers. I grew up in the UK and had, an excellent traditional education, about the best that you can get. Selective state school, and I studied engineering at the University of Cambridge. And I started my career in the software development lab that IBM had close to Winchester in the UK before going on my entrepreneurial journey. And when I was thinking about what I was going to do next in 2015, I was leaving Square, who had acquired my first company, and I was wanting to have an impact on the world in a positive way. My mind turned to education because of my parents, and also because I wanted to have kids. I didn't have kids then, but I knew I wanted to have kids, and it was important to me to have work on things that were kind of integrated into my life, and that got me thinking about my own education, and I started to realize that although I had an absolutely fantastic traditional education, I saw gaps and issues that made me want something different for my kids. And I noticed just this discrepancy had been on my mind for a while between what I'd learned was important in my entrepreneurial endeavors and even in creative work like software engineering versus how and what I'd been taught in school. And don't get me wrong, like being numerate and learning how to read and write and talk, the foundational skills are super important. And also the doors opened by having gone to the University of Cambridge were really important. But I started to see that that's like nowhere near enough. And I had higher expectations of what I wanted my kids to learn. And then I realized that I was so fortunate because my parents supported me with those other things, and they were so influential to my success, even more so than anything about my schooling. And I thought about what it is that they did, and they really helped me cultivate a love of learning, and they helped me pursue interests. One of which was learning how to program computer games. I got into computer games when I was young, and they helped me pursue that interest, not because they thought it was going to turn into a valuable career. Software engineering careers weren't a thing at the time, but because they just valued that love of learning, that curiosity, and they nurtured it. And so this thesis started to form that there were gaps in the way we were doing education that were going to get worse because of various changes in the world, and we can talk about that. And it was possible to fill them with some new techniques. And it was most important, instead of all the structures, all the tests, all the stuff that's typically talked about in education, the most important thing is that love of learning. And that was a major influence in founding Outschool.
I love that. So back in 2015, there were still, pockets of these emerging startups and people kind of interested in alternative education. Of course, I've been tracking the homeschooling and microschooling movement for many years, which began, really back in the mid 1990s, in kind of full swing, and it certainly has gained traction over the past couple of decades. And you were very much a part of that in 2015 as well. I'm curious what else you were spotting at the time in terms of interest in and momentum toward unconventional educational models, learning outside of a conventional classroom. What else were you spotting at that point?
Well, with the ideas that I talked about with love of learning, there was a challenge I felt at the time, which was like how to make this real, how to create some kind of a systemic change to focus more on love of learning, have this broader view of what education can and should be, and raise our standards of what kids should learn, how we treat learning. And I was intrigued by a number of different models, one of which was marketplace-based models. The idea that you could provide tremendous variety, which allows for choice and personalization. And the fact that marketplaces has transformed other industries, like a hotel reservation with Airbnb, and getting a car, a taxi with Uber and Lyft, and solving these really complex, trust-based logistical problems at scale was possible with this model. Um, and it struck me that in education circles, there's so much talk about personalization, but often it means like, one of those books where you choose A, B, C, as opposed to real personalization, where it's not just like choose between three, but something that's really, really personal to you. And it struck me that marketplace-based models were much more likely to be able to deliver against that versus kind of a one-size-fits-all system that, is curriculum set top down and try to do everything for all kids. So that was intriguing me. And then the thought was, well, I'm a product innovator. I like building companies. I know that even if you have these elements which make sense, you have a thesis about where the world is going, and you have some interesting models in order to deliver that thesis. You need customers, obviously, and in particular, at the start, you need true believers, like a small group of customers who really get it and are going to adopt whatever it is that you build. That was really the catalyst to founding Outschool, when I combined this set of thinking with a community that I discovered, a homeschooling community. There was a homeschooling community in the Bay Area where I live, and I got connected, especially with the gifted homeschooling community, and started to learn about it. And it was a real light bulb. I was like, oh wow, like all these ideas I'm having, like this community is living it today. And I took a look at this, and it was like, wow, I think I can see the future of education in what these families are doing, but no one's kind of serving them. No one's building products for them. No one's trying to like scale what they're doing and bring it to a much wider audience. And at that point, I got tremendously excited about the potential of connecting this idea of personalization and choice through a marketplace-based model with the homeschooling movement that's blossomed now into a wider alternative education movement.
Yeah, so let's talk about kind of the first 5 years of Outschool.com before the disruption caused by COVID, which not only supercharged your reach and impact as an online learning platform that provided this sort of personalized learning, but also increased much more interest from parents in unconventional education models and supplementary education. But in those first 5 years, how did you move from sort of these innovators and early adopters, kind of your initial customers who were already thinking quite differently about education, to more of that kind of early majority, if we think about an innovation curve of adoption? What was that like?
Yeah, as always with startup journeys, it's a winding road. And at first, you're trying things and you're learning. And so, the way we went about it was we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have this intense focus specifically on homeschoolers. And even in the earliest days, specifically on these gifted homeschoolers in the Bay Area. We're going to try and build something for them. We're going to try and learn about what it is they do, what's great about it, and think then about how we could package that up and make it available for a much wider audience. And so, while building the marketplace-based model, we're constantly iterating, we're constantly asking families, hey, what is it that you need that maybe you don't have access to now, or what do you already do that you think is really great that other families benefit from? Listen to their answers, and then go get teachers or customer or field trips, or anything that they wanted on the supply side. For example, I think our first class was run by a researcher at UCSF who was doing some stem cell based research, and he created a class about this high level research designed for 12-year-olds, and that just sold out because it was like you couldn't access that anywhere else. And then we'd ask like the providers, like who is it, how are you finding these homeschoolers who are taking these classes? And they talk about how they often run things for schools, but then there's all these groups come together of parents independently come and go on these field trips or take advantage of these opportunities. And so we've started locating these pockets. And then we discovered, and we were doing in-person classes, we were experimenting with online content, but then we also discovered that these families were getting together online over Skype or over Zoom with each other or with a teacher or with one of the parents acting as a guide or a teacher to do these online learning opportunities. And it seemed like a niche within a niche. You're already talking about small community, real focus on that small community, and then this seemed like a very, very small part of what they did. But we tried it out, so we wrote, and it blew up in our marketplace, and we started to discover, like this format of learning combined with this community is incredibly powerful. But suddenly, these homeschoolers were able to connect around learning opportunities with homeschoolers, not just in their physical location, but across the country or even around the world. And that's how we went from this kind of small initial audience to a much larger audience through the discovery of this live online small group learning experience. So this was years before COVID. So that was already happening within the homeschool community at that time.
Right. And so when I interviewed you in 2019, you had said that you had served about 60,000 students at that point, clearly moving from your niche within a niche to a much larger population. And then COVID hit. So what was that experience like, and how quickly did you know that this was going to be a game changer for education and that outschool.com was positioned to really be a part of sort of the during and post-COVID education transformation?
By February 2020, before schools shut and everything changed, it was already becoming obvious to me that people were radically underestimating the potential impact here. The moment I specifically remember was reading this guidance coming out from the CDC, as the news was starting to go through, as things were going on internationally, there was a big problem here. And it said something like, schools may need to move to internet-based teleschooling. And I took a look at that phrase, and it was like an moment, like internet-based. What the hell do they mean? Like, what they mean is classes online, like over video conference. That's what they mean, and that's what we do, and that's what we've been doing for years at that point. And to me, it was obvious that this was going to be absolutely massive for our business because trying to move entire school systems to this new way of learning overnight just wasn't going to work. And we realized that many parents, those who could afford it, would come to us for help during that time. And that panned out. That's exactly what happened. And we did our best also to support schools trying to transition to online and share our expertise. And we also created programs for families in need with our outschool.org nonprofit arm. But also many families turned to us because they were at home trying to work remotely, trying to occupy their kids, trying to just get their kids engaged and keep their kids in touch with learning. So a much wider audience of families who had never considered homeschooling or alternative education were suddenly faced with the need to find alternatives for their kids. We can go into more from that time because
I would love to, because it does
Yeah.
sound like you really stepped in. And I know my kids in spring of 2020 were for sure using outschool.com classes, as were so many. It was really just a wonderful resource, especially as schools kind of began to ramp up and figure out how they were going to manage prolonged remote learning. So then what happened though? Because I imagine that even though you're seeing this increased demand in spring and summer of 2020, you're also recognizing that education is going to continue to be disrupted across the country and around the world. throughout the 2020-21 school year and beyond. So what did you start thinking about, and how did you adapt and meet that increasing demand?
Totally. Well, for a while there, it was simply about keeping keeping on track, keeping the wheels on while we grew just tremendously. Our business grew more than 15x in a single year, which is kind of very not typical at the scale that we were already at, even for like the fastest growing startups. So a lot of it was just about, trying to double our teacher base, trying to maintain quality of the classes. One struggle was kind of maintaining the ethos when you have big new influxes of teachers and families who aren't used to the way things are typically done. And this wasn't just with OutSchool, but in the homeschooling online groups that we're part of and connected to, they had big influxes of parents wondering how to do this whole homeschooling thing. So it was just like this huge influx. And then as we got a handle on it and successfully kind of scale the company, we started noticing these trends of pandemic pods. And it was kind of funny to see that rebrand because like it's a homeschool co-op. But we're starting to see, oh wow, there are these concepts and these structures that were already very common and well known in the homeschooling community, like getting a rebrand and being adopted more mainstream. But what's really interesting is, the pandemic was a kind of a point in time, and I think people kind of overestimated maybe the structural change that would happen in that moment in time, but actually underestimating the structural changes that continue to happen now post pandemic. And so here's some of what I'm seeing, through all that and continue to happen today. Number one, like online learning is so much better understood. Before the pandemic, we had to explain what homeschooling was, what alternative education was, and like what online learning was. We don't have to explain what online learning is anymore. People have concerns about the quality depending on how they experienced it through the pandemic and how their school implemented it. But online learning is now just a thing. But then, these pandemic pods, for many families, they kind of came and went, but some stuck. And and we continue to see evolution of this idea with microschools, and which are look a little bit like homeschool co-ops, but this time more like teacher entrepreneur led. But many of the same ideas, this idea of crafting education for a small group and creating something different than the standard system. And then who would have believed that there'd be so much public funding now going into the alternative ecosystem? I might have estimated it would take 20 years, like from the founding of OutSchool, for the alternative ecosystem to evolve to where it already is. And so I think an underestimated thing is, that really the kind of pandemic shock was just the start of what I see as a snowball. And the other thing I'm seeing is continued challenges with the traditional school system. The challenges are getting worse, and they were accelerated by the pandemic. But now you have kids coming out of the pandemic at all kinds of different levels. Learning loss is real, and federal funds are being put to work, and there's all these companies trying to do tutoring within the system in order to kind of address learning loss. But then you have teacher vacancies and impossibility to hire teachers because teachers have realized that their professional friends are now able to work from home with all this flexibility and are getting more pay, and their conditions haven't changed significantly to the positive. They've become worse, especially with the pressures on the system post pandemic. And then you have declining enrollments as some families choose the alternative ecosystem, and as a result, schools have a funding crisis that is being somewhat held off by emergency funds, and it varies across region. But I've heard it be talked about that the 24-25 school year is going to be a bloodbath by an education economist in terms of school funding. So you have all these structural challenges which were exacerbated, and then this rapid, somewhat unseen growth in the alternative ecosystem. I think it's going to be really interesting times going forward. I don't think it's just the pandemic. I think there's going to be a lot of change in education over the next 5 years.
Yeah, and great to see outschool.com very much a part of that change and helping to empower parents, teachers, and learners. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the model, because some of my favorite things about outschool.com are the variety and abundance of choice of education choices and different learning options, and also the marketplace accountability right? That you could have teachers sign on to be instructors at outschool.com, and they can offer a class. And if there's no demand for that class, then it doesn't run. And then they have to pivot and find something that might be appealing to their audience. Or if they are offering a class and it gets rated poorly, then more people probably won't join that class, or they will also have to think about ways of improving their model and their offerings. Tell us a little bit about that sort of accountability loop.
That's really the power of a marketplace-based model. On the supply side of this marketplace, we are treating teachers as creative, professional entrepreneurs who are not only creating great learning experiences, but are finding the niche in the market where they find pockets of demand which were previously underserved. And when you think about pockets of demand that are underserved, in an educational point of view, this is serving kids who would not otherwise have access to the kinds of learning opportunities. And the marketplace-based model makes it profitable, incentivizes teachers, means they can earn far more than they could within the regular school system if they're able to identify those niches which are underserved. So the incentives are aligned. People talk a lot about access in education. People talk a lot about personalization in education, and how kids struggle if they don't fit the environment or the environment is unable to fit them. Well, a marketplace-based model creates the incentives and allows for that flexibility to serve more kids better. It comes with challenges. Right now, there is public funding coming into the alternative ecosystem, but a lot of the time the parent has to pay out of pocket. So we need to address those challenges over time. But the fundamental incentives that teachers are trying to serve kids and trying to adapt their offering to best serve certain groups of kids, I believe is incredibly powerful.
And what are you seeing right now of some of the trends in the classes that are in most demand? Are they sort of the one-off classes like Minecraft, or are they more the one-on-one tutoring programs that Outschool.com offers? Or are they the multi-week, more intensive programs? What kinds of trends are you seeing there?
Over time, as we've built out the products and as we've built our brand and trust with parents, we've seen deeper forms of engagement. At the start, we only really offered these one-time enrichment classes. Then over time, we built the capability to introduce clubs that met every week, or to have classes that met week over week with material that builds. And now we have much more intensive offerings where you can do academic tutoring, or you can do, full curriculum courses. And we see families, adopting those at greater rates because, in the alternative education ecosystem, one challenge is if you're in a small micro school, the teacher entrepreneur, will come in with certain expertise, but then when you get to middle school level math, say, they might not be best placed in order to offer that subject. Or if you're a homeschooling family, you may be able to the parent may be able to help guide kids at a young age through certain curriculum, but you get to a point where oftentimes you want to bring in others, and sometimes that can happen in a peer-to-peer capacity, depending on your homeschooling group. But sometimes you want to bring in someone to help your child with certain subjects, and including outsourcing certain elements of their education, and that's where we come in because you can come to Outschool and you can pick and choose from a variety of different teachers, a variety of different courses. You can go as deep or as light as you like, and you can find something regardless of your philosophy. We serve unschoolers who generally want very little structural traditional education, but sometimes their kid wants to learn an interest which is hard to serve locally or hard to serve by the parent. They come to us. Many homeschoolers adopt eclectic philosophies where they're picking and choosing and depending on, and do some unschooling, do some project based, do some traditional academic, and again they can find elements of what they need on Outschool. So our goal is to be maximally flexible so that any family, regardless of their needs, regardless of their education philosophy, can meet those needs on Outschool.
And what are you seeing in trends of your audience, right? You clearly have these homeschooling parents. You have parents whose children are in traditional schools who want classes after school and on weekends and summer break and school vacation weeks. And then you have sort of these micro schools or, sort of low cost private schools and homeschooling collaboratives. that are, I would imagine, you're seeing picking up the pace there too. We now see reporting out of EdChoice surveys that they've recently done showing 10% of students are now learning in a microschool, and parents are really excited about these new innovative models. What are you seeing growth in? Is it more of the homeschooling independent world, or is it more of the microschooling space? And where maybe are you seeing some of this growth?
We're seeing growth on both sides with families with kids in regular schools looking to supplement. And in fact, we're seeing a surge right now. We're entering the summer where everyone is a homeschooler, and in-person camps are expensive and you can't usually fill the whole time with them. So, how are you going to keep your kids engaged and connected with their learning? Many families turn to outschool, and so we're seeing a surge of that now. But of course, like the alternative education ecosystem, continues to experience this growth. So we see that continually to be a growth driver. Um, and in fact, by introducing a wider set of families to OutSchool, we provide kind of an on-ramp to some of these ideas. So we see families over time who maybe come to use OutSchool as a supplement for their kids' education start to realize they can use it for more and more. And microschools are super interesting because the data shows that families who are starting to choose microschools do not actually consider themselves to be homeschools or even part of the alternative education ecosystem. It's not that homeschoolers are adopting microschools. It's parents who would have otherwise chosen a traditional school are seeing microschools as a competitive option. So us, in conjunction with this whole ecosystem, are providing an on-ramp to this kind of thinking. So those are the trends we're seeing, but it's hard to reason about, right? Because in each state, there's different kind of ways of gathering the metrics, and so I think this is underreported in terms of a trend because of there's no kind of centralized way to get hold of these metrics, and it's hard to interpret. So some groups are now trying to come up with these reports, and it's starting to raise awareness of it, but I still think it's underappreciated, underreported. What is more reported is that enrollments in many school districts are down, and no one really knows where those kids are going. And I believe many are entering the alternative education ecosystem in various ways.
And you also mentioned the expansion of school choice policies, especially education savings account programs that have become universal in several states. And how has that impacted your growth in various states? I think about, for example, Florida and Arizona and now Utah and other areas that have these much more kind of robust definitions of education beyond schooling. How is that impacting your on-ramps to outschool.com in those areas?
It's been incredible to see and really surprising. Those alternative education funds have grown from zero to be 10% of our business inside 12 months. And we see there's some uncertainty and volatility. For example, the Virginia microgrant program has just expired, and I think politically, I'm not sure it's going to get renewed, or if it gets renewed, it'll be through some different form that's more through the traditional school system. But then you've got Arizona with a universal ESA, which is only at the tip of the iceberg of being adopted. We see tremendous growth from Arizona specifically because of that ESA, and we're one of the biggest providers for it. And then you have other states that are increasingly introducing variants of the policy. Some call them ESA, some call them microgrants, like Virginia did. But there's variants of this happening around the country. And then Texas, it seems likely to pass, given that it's been reported that previous senators that previously objected to it are no longer being elected. And I think it reflects the political will amongst families in these states to drive towards those solutions. One thing that's pretty obvious is this is happening predominantly in red states. It's not happening in blue states. But I think this can and needs to happen in every state, and is not associated with kind of a political party and a political movement. I think there might be structural reasons in some states why it hasn't been adopted yet. But I think people get hung up a bit about this idea of, oh, isn't this like isn't the alternative ecosystem damaging kind of public education. But remember, this is public education. These CSAs are public dollars. So it's not that I or anyone involved in this ecosystem doesn't believe in like public education or there needs to be some activity here. It's just that this is a better model. I think the other thing that people don't really want to hear, but needs to be said, is that public education is failing in this country. Yes, there might be pockets of greatness, usually in wealthier areas, but it is not succeeding. It has been deeply troubled for a long time. If you look at parent trust in education, according to Gallup polls collected since the 70s, it's been on a downward trend. And efforts to reform have not addressed that trend. And, I think people have struggled to accept this because when you say things like that, people think you're trying to like damage the system. It's no, no, no. It's already damaged. It's not what we're doing. It's not what anyone's doing. This is a system that is breaking, and it needs to be rebuilt. And the great thing about especially coming in as an immigrant, the great thing about American culture is the willingness to rebuild, the willingness to innovate, and the willingness to change. And that's what I see in the alternative education ecosystem, and that's what we've got to build.
And the willingness to be entrepreneurial. We've seen in the wake of 2020, not only this surge in education alternatives, but a surge in general entrepreneurship after years of an entrepreneurial slump in America, and education entrepreneurs like you very much a part of that growing entrepreneurial momentum. And it seems to be lasting. Here we are 4 years past that disruption in 2020, and entrepreneurship rates in the US continue to be at record rates. So great to see that too. And maybe we could begin to wrap up, Amir, with the idea around advice for burgeoning education entrepreneurs. A lot of the folks who listen to and watch my podcast are people who are considering opening up their own micro school or learning pod or tutoring center or homeschool collaborative or some other innovative education model, and are wondering how to do that, how to be a startup entrepreneur. I wonder if you can share your advice, your thoughts as someone who's started several companies that have been very successful.
I'll say two things. One is you need to skate to where the puck's going, to use that metaphor. So, everything I've said today is about current trends, but you need to develop a philosophy of the future and a vision for the future and recognize it's going to take multiple years to build to that. So, don't build for the trends today, recognize the trends today, but build for the trends of tomorrow. What are going to be the needs in 3 years? What are going to be the needs in 5 years? And then look today for the trend lines, then project forward. I think the other thing to say is that when you're trying to innovate, you need to avoid being too tied to the way that things are currently done. So it's important to look at how things are currently done and not do that, or look at attempts that have not been successful and not do that. And I think that's an under-recognized part of it. If something's been tried before, then maybe it wasn't tried in quite the right way, or maybe it wasn't executed right. But more often than not, it's smart, motivated people who have tried something. It's not because they're dumb. It's because there's something structurally wrong, and the idea needs to change. So don't underestimate that the need for those insights, the need to kind of research what's already been done and try and do something very different.
I love that. And, just sort of thinking about the future of education, the trends that will be happening. There's so much opportunity, so much possibility. I think so much hope and optimism, but I'm curious what you think maybe are some of the threats or the challenges that education entrepreneurs or people thinking about innovation and education may confront that are good to be aware of.
I think the space is very volatile. And that can make, and especially with all the changes that I've described, so there's a high degree of uncertainty, which can make it challenging in terms of standard business planning, like how to predict the financial side of things. And also from an investment perspective, if you're going down the path of seeking investment for your venture, again, investors are skittish. Because there'll be many attempts at innovation in the education sector, some of which haven't gone particularly well. So I would focus on investors like we have, who really have specialized in and found success in education technology, like our partners at Reach Capital, our partners at Union Square Ventures. There's many kind of generic venture firms who've tried to come into education with big visions and a desire to do good, and have got completely burnt because they're approaching it in the wrong way, or without the deep domain expertise that I believe is necessary to be successful.
Well, the website is outschool.com. And as we wrap up, Amir, if folks go to that website and kind of visit outschool.com, parents or teachers, what would you like them to know about what they'll find there?
Enter your kids' age and their interests, and what I hope you'll see is tremendous variety of classes that can meet their needs, and really passionate entrepreneurial teachers who will showcase what they can do with the teacher videos. We try and provide simple search, simple categorization. You don't even need to sign up in order to kind of come and look at our classes. So we suggest sit down with your learner, take a look, and see if anything catches their interest.
Well, thank you for helping to build the future of learning to make it much more personalized and child-centered. Amir Nathoo, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thanks, Kerry. It's been a pleasure.